Right, well, there's nothing worse when you go out to watch a game of football with your mates, especially in a pub or wherever, and the place doesn't put the commentary on. Or even worse, you have to listen to someone else's commentary on another match. It's an absolute honker. But whether it's radio or telly, commentators are our eyes, ears, and emotions in live sport. But how has the role changed over the years? How difficult is it to get into the industry and do that role? And what makes a good commentator? Who better to tell us than two absolute class arts of the game in the commentary booth? We've got Derek Ray and we've got Rory Hamilton. How are you both?
Very good, thank you. Thank you for having us on. And very nice of you to say that. Usually when I go into a pub, they're delighted when I shut up.
Well, there's my first question, Rory. Do you go in and commentate in the game in your head? Or out loud?
Absolutely not. No, that's down.
Derek, how are things with you?
Very well, thanks, Andrew. Good to see everybody. Thanks for the invitation. I have to say that I'm sort of the nerd here, and even when I am watching a game in my own time, I'm not sort of mentally commentating, but I am thinking about little identification things. Oh, he's wearing red boots tonight. Okay, mentally file that one away for the next game, but he might also be wearing red boots.
Just to kick things off, it'd be good to get an idea, a brief background, shall we say, your careers so far. So, Rory, can you just start off by telling us, where did you start out? How did you get into media, and how did that lead to getting into the commentary booth?
Yeah, so when I was at university, I used to come through from Edinburgh to Glasgow on a Sunday afternoon, I think it was, to STV when they had their Scott Sport programme with Graham Spears playing the piano and all that sort of thing. And I just used to, I mean, it was very, very basic. I used to put up their interviews on the website. It was, learn a system for putting a file on a website, and that was basically it. But that was kind of my way into the industry. Eventually got a job with them as a very junior assistant producer, and then stayed in the sort of production side of things from STV. Jim Delahunt kind of took me down to Setanta, which was just down the stairs, that sort of got me awarded into the live side of broadcasting, which I really enjoyed, that live element. And then because there was a lot more going on a Saturday with 6 commentators out at games, that's probably the first moment that you start to realise that commentary is actually a job, and it's potentially somewhere down the line attainable because you're in the right place. But it really took until Setanta went by the wayside for me to go freelance, and worked with mainly Sky Sports, but did a lot of other projects as well, and that was where I got my first sort of route into commentary. But it was very much as sort of Ian Crocker's sidekick. So when there was a double header in the Scottish Cup, then they'd wheel me out a few times a season. But Derek going to the States was probably actually, that was how I got my break into being a full-time commentator. I felt that I could actually justify saying that was my job.
That's true, because I remember Derek actually bumped into you at BT Sport when you had announced you were leaving to go. I know you share your time between the US, but you do so much more now in the Bundesliga because you're so passionate. Because you studied in Germany as well, didn't you? But
I did.
How did your career start then, and how different do you think that was from Rory's?
Well, just following on from what Rory said, I was personally delighted when I heard that Rory was going to be my successor at BT Sport, because obviously I had no say in that. I simply decided that I was going to be leaving in 2017, and I'd hoped that Rory was the person they were going to approach, and that's how it turned out. So it's always nice when things like that do come to pass. But my story goes back a bit further. Obviously, I'm a bit older. So we're going back to the 1970s, when I used to simply make tapes to myself of commentaries. And it was a passion I had as a young boy. And the tapes I would just keep. I've actually got a few of them back in Aberdeen. My father's kept a few of them. And from that point on, I sort of then gravitated towards going to the local park and commentating in my little sort of mini tape recorder. And then to Pittodrie, because I'm from Aberdeen, so that was the local team. I would do that for reserve team games, and then plucked up the courage to do it for first team games when I was about 12 or 13. And I would sit near the front of the south stand, the same stand where the TV cameras are nowadays. And I'd get very strange looks. I became known as that silly little loon that that sits and talks to himself for 2 hours, and didn't know at the time what I was actually doing was building a body of work. And I then took that body of work to hospital radio, and they gave me a chance when I was a teenager. And that was the era of Fergie and, Willie Miller and Alec McLeish and Gordon Strachan and Aberdeen winning a European trophy. So again, I was very lucky to be involved, albeit as an amateur at that time, and just kept doing it with hospital radio. And then when I went to university, also in Aberdeen, to study German, I decided that I was going to send my tapes to BBC Radio Scotland. Now, I should also say that earlier on, when I was about 12 or 13, I'd sent my tapes to the commentator who was my hero, David Francie.
Here at Dens Park, there's still no scoring, so Hearts at the moment have this vital point that can win them the title. And how the crowd know it, but it's a corner to Dundee over on that far side. A high and curling ball is let it down by Brown, it's in the net, and a goal! A goal led by Albert Kidd. The corner headed down there by Brown. Across it came to Kidd, and he just whipped it into the Hearts net. The unthinkable has happened. With 7 minutes of this game left for play, it's Dundee 1, Heart of Midlothian 0.
Who was, to me, just Scottish football. His voice represented Scottish football. And I wrote to him thinking I'll never hear back. But 3 weeks later, I got this beautiful handwritten letter, which I still have. And it sort of just made my year to hear from my broadcasting hero. And he was very nice, very complimentary, gave me some tips, which I still use to this day, about how to use your voice and how to be prepared for a commentary and things like that. And thought nothing of it. But what has happened was when I sent my tape to the BBC, it ended up with David again. And David then gave it to the producer. And the producer said, quite like this, and invited me down to Glasgow. We had a chat. He said, I'd like to get you on the air sometime. Got me on the air for a reporter's gig at Pittodrie. In those days, we didn't do live commentary on every single game. It was updates. So I did the updates. Got that under my belt, thought they went fine. And then a couple of weeks after that, they suddenly needed a commentator on a game at Kilmarnock Dumbarton, then in the second tier, the old first division. And I went down and did that. It was because literally all the other commentators, including David Francie, were unavailable either through illness. In his case, it was actually a knee injury. Jerry McNee was unavailable, Rory Forsyth was unavailable, so they got down the list to me. And they thought, okay, we'll give this young guy his chance. I was 19 at the time. So I did the game, and when you're 19, I think it's the same being a footballer or in most walks of life. You're not actually as nervous as you are at, 39, 49. I can say that from experience now. So I did the game, went back home. There was a message, called the BBC, called Charles Runcie, the senior producer. So I called Charles. He said, well done today. He said, would you like to do a second assignment for us? I said, I would love that. I said, when might that be? He said, well, how about this midweek? We'd like to send you to Wembley to do England against Scotland. And that was my second game on the air. And again, you can't expect that as a young broadcaster. You don't really expect that even as a seasoned broadcaster. So my second game on the air was England-Scotland with John Gregg as my co-commentator. And from that point on, I was with the BBC for several years. Learned, TV during that time as well. I was a radio commentator, and proudly a radio commentator. Didn't really want to do TV at that time, but got into TV. And again, it's just about getting that lucky break. You have to be a bit lucky, and I was certainly very fortunate at a young age.
I love how just listening to that is fascinating. Derek actually had a plan. I required a company going bust, and then actually the way that I got my very first commentary was it was a rugby game, and we were sitting in a meeting. It was after Setanta had gone, and STV did a rugby program, and we were sitting after the first week, patting ourselves on the back, and Colin Davidson, who Derek will know well, was the exec producer on that program, and he turned and he said, look, everyone's done really well in the program, but our only criticism is that we've got a league that involves Welsh and Irish and Scottish teams, and we've got Welsh commentators and Irish commentators, but no Scottish voice. So I sort of joked, oh, well, I could do it. And
brilliant.
Everyone sort of laughed, and there was nothing taken seriously. I wasn't meaning it seriously. I was commuting from my parents' house up in Speyside, so it was like a 3.5 hour drive every week to come down to like sleep on people's floors because, you know, like gave up my flat in Glasgow and all that kind of thing, and was driving down to a game at Murrayfield that was Edinburgh against Connacht, and Colin phoned me and said, you know, you made that joke in the meeting, and I was like, yeah. Well, you're doing the game tonight. So I was
tonight? It was on the night.
Okay, so it was like total change of mentality, and because now I'll very much like Derek, I'm a bit of a stats guy, and I'll do my prep to the nth degree, no matter what game it is, who it's for. It's part of the preparation that you just want to get your head in the game by spending a couple of days looking over all the information on it. And that was very much thrown in at the deep end kind of gig. So that's how my first game came. Not quite Scotland, England.
I'm always fascinated to see the amount of work that has to go into preparation for a game, regardless of the level, if it's a World Cup final or, you know, if it's a Scottish Cup first round game or whatever it is. And I know that there's a huge amount of prep, but one thing I really wanted to ask is, how much do you let your commentary kind of flow in the moment, and how much of the things that you say are kind of pre-planned? Because I know that, you know, there's a lull in the game, you'll probably slip into something, that a fact here or something you've pre-planned. But if you know a big moment could happen, or if it might happen, do you kind of try and pre-plan that in advance? Or do you just try and soak up the emotion and the atmosphere of the game and let that come out?
I think the emotion and the atmosphere are the most important things. I will say to people, yeah, we do all this preparation. Rory's right. We spend days doing this preparation, but we do it in the knowledge that if we're lucky, we might use 2 or 3% of what we've actually prepared that day, you know, but you have to do the 100% without knowing, you know, which part of the preparation you're actually going to make use of on air. But the passion and the emotion are more important than that. What you want to be in a position to do is not miss something that's really important, you know. So, you know, what's not important is if somebody has scored the 10th goal of their career. But if somebody is about to score the 100th goal of their career for a club, you need to know that, and you need to be ready for that. So you're not scripting that as such, but you need to have in your head, oh yeah, if he scores, then that is something I have to mention. But the passion and the emotion, that's more important, because fans in the stadium or on TV, they're not thinking about the numbers so much. They're, you know, supporting their team or not liking another team maybe, or whatever. They have different motivations for watching a game. So it is that combination. But I always think that everything is best when it's organic. If you try to over-plan what you're going to say in the heat of the moment, it's going to sound over-planned. But at the same time, there's that sort of happy medium between being prepared but not being scripted, you know, and I think that's what you always strive for, because you're living in the moment. And you could, you know, and I know people who prepare a lot of lines during games, and they'll do it as a fail-safe. You know, I've got a very good friend who's in commentary who says, I always prepare a line because, you know, I just want to have it there in my head in case it does happen. But then when it does happen, you just don't use it. Or he would say, I probably never use it, or 1% of the time would use it. So we're all a little bit different in that sense. But yeah, I mean, the live commentary should always be live commentary, and it should be what you're feeling at that time. And a lot of it comes from experience, from having done it for a long time, knowing how you react. The funny thing is that for all that you know, fans think commentators, you know, should lose it and should shout and scream, I always say we actually shouldn't shout and scream. As a commentator, if we were to shout and scream as though we were in a pub, it wouldn't sound very good on the air. So there's a certain skill to knowing how to use your voice in a big moment. You're projecting more than you are shouting and screaming. And, you know, sometimes we're happier with the end result than we are at other times. You know, I'm sure Rory will agree with me. Sometimes you've commentated on a big moment and you thought that went well, and you hear it back and you sort of go, I could have done that a bit better. Or conversely, sometimes you think, I didn't quite do that justice, and then you listen back and you think, oh, actually, that was fine. So you never quite know. I don't know what you think about that, Rory.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, what you're not going to get too much of on this podcast is a big contrast of mine and Derek's approaches, because I was fortunate enough to learn from Derek, and Ian Crocker were really good mentors for me coming up. Whenever I had a piece of advice to ask, a conversation to have, then they were always there for me. So a lot of my style of commentary comes from them. So unsurprisingly, I completely agree with Derek. I'm not one that will script certainly these big live moments. I think there are elements that I will script, things like teams emerging onto the pitch. I like to get that right. I won't script it probably until half an hour, 20 minutes before kickoff, because I want to get myself into the moment, to feel what the stadium's like, the walk up to the ground, even the city the days before. So those bits I'll script, but live things not. I'll come back to it as well though. What I do quite like to do, I'm a big outdoors guy. I love being in the mountains, and one of the things that I do, any big game, I like to get myself into the hills and just by myself or with the dog. And it's not to script things, but all I'll do is think about that big game that's coming up, and it's to prepare yourself for what might happen. And I play through endless eventualities in that game. None of them will happen, I know that, but it just prepares your mind for, what if John McGinn scores in the 96th minute to qualify Scotland for the Euros? Things like that. You've already worked through that in your mind and how you might feel. So rather than just being in total shock, and obviously a moment like that, you would be so emotional anyway, and you might just lose the plot being so excited, that I think that's an opportunity to just set yourself up for those big moments, prepare yourself mentally. Over my career, there have been a few that throughout games, little phrases have maybe come to me, and I might have jotted a couple of words down on the side of my paper, thinking, well, I'll never use them, but because it's maybe come to you at some point during the game, you're like, I don't actually want to lose that. So one of them, which is one that I often get asked about by Celtic fans, was their victory over Lazio, which ironically is the game that I'm doing on Wednesday. So I'm looking forward to that, but I can't use the same line again. So it was the one about the Glaswegian Coliseum. About, 15 minutes before the end, I scribbled Coliseum and Glasgow down on the side of my notes, because I was like, this place is a real Coliseum of Glaswegian football. But it wasn't until the goal actually went in that there was a trigger in your mind that Glaswegian Coliseum rolls off the tongue a little bit better than Glasgow Coliseum. But you can only do that sort of thing if it's a last kick of the ball kind of game. Those are the ones that you have to commit on, because the result is pretty certain. So they're not things I don't think that you can just fully prepare for and write line after line in the hope that it happens. You very occasionally, maybe a handful of times, Derek will know much better, handful of times in your career that you maybe get that little poetic gem that just works a treat.
Yeah.
I was good. That is what I was going to ask, was how much you've played it out in your mind, because you're going to have that, hopefully, that killer line of when we do actually clinch qualification, which is going to be historic. And that's what I was going to ask you. You kind of answered that, but what I also want to know is, Derek, you'd mentioned having that resilience to kind of hold yourself, not get caught up in emotion. But how much do you enjoy if your co-commentator gets carried away? And I'm thinking, obviously, the most recent one being the Norway game with Mikey Stewart screaming over you, Rory. Personally, I like that, because it almost feels like there's a kind of fan element to it, but I understand that can only really happen in certain games, like Scotland, for example. How much do you enjoy that sort of emotion coming right around you?
Yeah, I thought that was a great moment from Michael, because it grasped the feeling of everyone watching it. And you're right, there probably are only a few games where you can do that, and it's on games for the national team, because pretty much your entire audience is wanting the same outcome. But also, that was a game where you couldn't really, for 89 minutes, you couldn't see that happening. It was just one of those games that threw something at you that you couldn't really predict or envisage beforehand. And I mean, I said to, so I've just got it over here. We've just moved house, and one of the guys off Twitter, Fitma Tweets, did a drawing for that, and he sent it to me. And I said to him, there's nothing textbook about my commentary. from that. It's not one that I would necessarily give advice on or put on my show reel, but it's one that I absolutely love. Not because of the words that I say, but it's just because it's pure emotion. And sometimes you just have to let yourself go. And that was one of those.
Yeah, if I could maybe chat about that subject generally, it's a good subject, Laura, because I can tell you this, as a breed, most commentators actually hate it when the co-commentator comes in and shouts loudly, because if you think about it, it's almost like, I think, and again, this sounds very precious, but it's like, it's like somebody is sort of trampling on the painting that you've just spent 2 hours trying to put together. Again, we understand why it happens, but I think it should only happen in a very specific situation like that. If it's happening in every game, then I think a producer would normally say to the co-commentator, no, just wait, because you'll get your moment. And that's the thing, is that the co-commentator has his or her moment come the replays to analyze, and that is their primary function. So the commentator ideally would come up with a line that matches the pictures. And I think that's the important thing. And I do think sometimes we get away from that a little bit in modern TV. We've sort of forgotten a bit that it's a visual medium. And as commentators, if we're at our best, this is just my opinion, but if we're at our best, our words should never overpower the pictures. Radio is different, because radio is the theatre of the mind. And in radio, you are creating the pictures for the person listening. But people on TV can see it. So the words should be subtle enough that they enhance the picture. It's quite difficult to get that right a lot of the time. And you are going on pure emotion. But that's when I said earlier, you have to be a little bit disciplined. You have to sometimes hold yourself back and not just make it sort of, verbiage and words for the sake of words. Should be words that are subtly enriching the picture and striking that balance. Difficult.
Is it quite an enjoyable thing to have the opportunity to watch back brilliant moments, whether it's with Scotland or like, Rory, you've covered a lot of iconic nights in the recent history of Rangers and Celtic in European matches. To know that you're kind of like, you're part of people's memories from those moments, and even something that kind of transcends that a little from your side, Derek, because obviously a whole generation that might not have heard you commentate live on games will know your voice very distinctly from being the voice of the FIFA and EA FC games now going forward. Is that quite a nice thing, that you are part of people's memories of certain moments and occasions and matches, or even for people that are maybe not even massive football fans, but get into the sport through playing games like FIFA or whatever, you're the person that they will associate that memory with?
Oh, undoubtedly. It's a lovely thing. I mean, it really is. It's a beautiful thing when somebody, and in social media, people have access to you now that maybe they didn't, in a way that they didn't several years ago. But it's a really touching thing if somebody says, and I heard somebody recently who said, for the last few years, you've been the voice of my upbringing.
A look at Neymar, a true entertainer, whether for club or country. Lee Dixon, what do you expect to see from him?
Well, I'm so pleased I've retired. I know that. I wouldn't like to mark Neymar. He goes left, he goes right, he turns you in circles. Absolute genius.
I'll tell you what, he's wishing you hadn't retired.
There's no need for that.
You've been the voice of my playing this video game that is iconic around the world, in my case. And, you're right. There are a lot of people who only know a commentator through the video game, and it's a different audience. It's a much younger audience. And the same for a big match. And if you've done a big match justice, hopefully you have, and you sort of become a little bit synonymous with that match because people remember watching it. One of the proudest things I have from my second spell working in Scotland between 2009 and 2017 was, Hearts fans still come to me and talk about the commentary we had on Hearts Hibs when Hearts were already going down, but everybody knew they were going down, but it looked as though they were going to go down in a derby against Hibs at Tynecastle. It turned out that Hibs also got relegated that same season, but Hibs fans were sort of gloating a little bit, and they were going to send Hearts down, and Hearts turned the tables on them, and that's when I'm very proud of. We're talking earlier, Rory was talking about lines that just come to you in a game. For some reason, Gary McAllister, my co-com, and I have been talking about Hearts being defiant and simply not letting it happen at their place. And again, I don't know where it came from. I had not planned it, but got a great shot of Gary Locke, the Hearts manager, when they made it 2-0 through Billy King right at the end of the game. Gary Locke going absolutely mental and shouting loudly. And I think I said, not on this patch of Edinburgh land, not in a derby, no relegation today.
Nicholson with the pass, it might fall for Billy King. He could finish it. Billy King! 2-0 to Hearts. And the message is clear. Not on this patch of Edinburgh land. Not in a derby. No relegation today.
And I since then, every year when that clip comes out, because nowadays people send clips out when it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I get a whole host of lovely responses from Hearts fans who say that is to me part of the whole experience of that day, which is very special for Hearts fans because they avoided relegation on a day when they really wanted to avoid relegation. Hibs didn't send them down. So if you can do that, and as I say, if you can just do it justice, I think that's all you strive for. But of course, it's nice when people are nice to you, because let's face it, as commentators, we're very much in the firing line, and people aren't always nice to us.
I actually had a really similar one in Rangers' recent run into the Europa League final when they won in Dortmund. And at half-time, Daryl Curry's sign-off into the break was Rangers are in dreamland in Germany. I was like, well, that's a good line, but I obviously can't use that again. But I was like, but I can do better. So the next goal was Dreamland in Deutschland. So I actually stole the line from Daryl.
Well done.
I was going to bring that one up purely just because I'm a Rangers fan and I live out in Melbourne. We moved out to Melbourne April 2022, so it was like right in the midst of the run to the Europa League final. So I was having to get used to getting up at like 3 a.m. to watch the games. And what was always brilliant was your commentary, kind of, Ibrox is bouncing or Dreamland in Deutschland or whatever, all these brilliant iconic moments that with every game I'm kind of sitting there in the dark with my headphones on the couch, kind of just at 4 a.m. being like, I feel I'm so far away from all of this happening, but I feel like it's happening right in front of me, because you totally captured like that emotion in the sense of, having been at Ibrox on a European night, I know what it feels like, and it felt like that coming through on the TV, which was a wonderful thing. So yeah, I was very pleased that you were kind of that you were delivering lines like that through all these iconic moments happening.
I think that's why, and I always try. Obviously, you get budget restrictions for a lot of things, and Derek will be well aware of this throughout his career. I always want to be at the ground, no matter what it is. I would pay my way to. Don't tell them. To get there. But I always want to be at the ground. It's never quite the same when not. So I think, just trying to... I remember those games when, Ibrox really was absolutely bouncing. The Leipzig game is like something I've never seen before anywhere. The emotion that night was quite incredible. It's one of those ones when you get home, it takes you hours to get to sleep because your mind's just trying to process everything that you've just taken in for 2-3 hours of your life, and you can't really work it out. But it's the nicest thing when people come to you and say, and I get a fair amount from Rangers fans for that run. The first time I got it was from Celtic's win in Rome against Lazio, and a lot of Celtic fans that night who had been at the game messaged me and said, we've just been playing your commentary all night since we got in, because they didn't hear it live, so they wanted to hear it. So that was really nice. So I've not done it for as many years, but those big European nights are really when I think that you can kind of come into your own. But I was when Derek was talking about doing his computer commentary, I'm almost a little bit starstruck here because I had a layover in Paris airport coming back from Nice on Monday. I was over for the rugby, and they've got all the PS5s set up. So I spent 8 hours listening to Derek.
Oh,
no way.
That's it for my flight.
I pity Rory's ears on the basis of that.
8 hours? Oh my goodness.
Yeah. 8 hours after a lot less than that sleep after the Scotland-Tonga game, I must add.
Amazing. I still like the mental picture that I have of Finn 3 a.m. watching Rangers run to the European Cup final, trying not to scream in celebration, otherwise the neighbours will phone the police thinking something's happened. How do you get away with that? Can I just steer us towards more kind of the run that Scotland are on at the moment? If we talk about the international setup, and Steve Clarke's a very good manager. It's a bit of a catchphrase of mine on this podcast. It was in the olden days as well. But Rory, you've had the joy of commentating on Scotland games, and Derek, I know you have in the past too. How much are you enjoying this run, and what is different about this Scotland team that maybe you think hasn't been in previous Scotland squads? I'll go to you, Rory, first, because you're currently following the team.
I think it stems from the manager, who very much put up that sort of mentality at Kilmarnock. They completely raised their game, particularly with Celtic and Rangers. Brendan Rodgers struggled at Rugby Park, Stephen Gerrard. That was another... I think I did twice back years, and Rangers came back from the January break and lost at Rugby Park, and it was like a graveyard of their title hopes. They seemed to just falter, and Steve Clarke thrived taking on, like Aberdeen in the 80s. If you could take on obviously not to dominate, it's virtually impossible now, but to be able to beat them, and not just on a one-off. And I think that he's got that mentality, a club mentality, into the national side. But I think the main thing, and I've been banging on about this for years, I'll refuse to be in the room if it's being brought up. I hate glorious failure. It's just failure. There's nothing glorious about it. Eventually, only one team can win a tournament. I can imagine if Scotland got to a final and lost, people would talk about that as glorious failure. It's complete rubbish. I think this team have taken that away from their psyche, and we as a nation probably need to get rid of it from our psyche. But this group of players, I think, have put that completely to the backs of their minds. They don't believe that this is all just going to, no matter how well it's going now, it's all just going to eventually end up in a failure. And I think that probably has taken a lot of work, because you look at squads that we've had in the past, very good players playing for big clubs that have won huge tournaments, and it seemed that there was always something in the back of the minds. And with the supporters, I think the supporters are starting to come round to that there's just a belief, that there's a trust that they can go out and get results when they need to.
Definitely.
What I would say about Scotland is that, and this is going back a few years, I remember being on a panel discussion program at ESPN with a lot of, old-time internationals, none of them from Scotland. But I remember I was the lone voice arguing for the changes that UEFA were making at that particular time to enlarge the Euros. And the sort of the elitist view was, well, no, we don't want little teams involved. We want, the best teams should be rewarded. And I made the point that all you're doing with that is you're enriching the already rich, so you're saying to FAs who already have a lot of money, oh yeah, we'll give you more money because you'll keep on qualifying and you'll have haves and you'll have have-nots. And Scotland were very much the have-nots. What I'm really saying is a long-winded way of saying I think that the changes to enlarge the Euros and to have the Nations League have really positively impacted Scotland. I think it's given countries like Scotland, who were very much on the outside looking in for an entire generation. You think back to the last time Scotland had been at a major tournament until the last Euros. Ridiculous, really. And for somebody, I'm in my 50s. I grew up with Scotland qualifying for every World Cup. It wasn't unusual. It was the norm. It happened. Now, getting out of the group, that was a challenge. That's always been a challenge. But Scotland were always there. So I think we should actually applaud, and we should always, as Scots, be defenders of the fact that more teams get to tournaments, because it was steadily going nowhere. You had the same teams virtually qualifying for every Euro. A country like Scotland just couldn't get in, but now you have more opportunities. And we saw that last time. Hopefully Scotland learned from the experience last time. I didn't think they played badly at the last Euro. I thought they were unlucky against the Czech Republic, did well against England, and then Croatia were just a bit too much. But I think this time, as Rory said, Steve Clarke deserves tremendous credit, because sometimes with a national team, I think being a national team manager, it's the ultimate job for a football pragmatist. It's not really a job for an idealist who wants to come in and impose a particular style. It's a job for somebody who's very good at saying, here's who I've got, here are the players who I have, I've got to make them into a team, can't be too fussy about it, we've got to play to our strengths and try to eliminate our weaknesses. And Steve Clarke has done that, and his personality suits this group of players. And yeah, Scotland are not the best team in Europe, nowhere close, but they're punching above their weight, and my goodness, we have not said that for a generation, and it's nice to be able to say that. And I hope Rory and I are at Scotland games together, because I'll be there working for US TV on the Euros, and I don't know if I'll be covering Scotland, but I very much hope so.
I just wondered if that argument that you presented to UEFA, Derek, if you could do the same for the Champions League as well.
Well, that's right.
Yeah, that'd be good.
No, 100%.
Exactly.
I mean, a huge believer on that. That I think that. And it's amazing just how ordinary people sometimes talk about, teams have to deserve it and they have to be there on merit, but they're not looking at the silly financial situation in football nowadays, where the rich just get richer and richer and richer. And every so often we have to do a lot, I think, in football to level that playing field financially.
Just that's a big question that always comes in a lot of Scottish football fans' minds, especially on Twitter and the other social media, is kind of enlarging the domestic league as well. Do you think that's different, or do you think that kind of follows the same sort of thought pattern? Do you think the top flight should be? I know we're going away from Scotland here, but just your thinking there, it kind of adds to the element of maybe the top flight should be extended to like a 16-team league, or is that different, do you think?
No, I think there's some logic to that as well. Although, see, a lot of people in Scotland always point to the fact that what they might see as the golden era, and that golden era, you could argue, was the 80s, when you had four really, top sides. You had Aberdeen and Dundee United, who arguably in the 80s were better than Rangers and at least as good as Celtic. And you had real competition at the top end of the table. And that came on the back of the creation of the top 10. And, back then it seemed that was the way forward. But I sort of understand the argument that, you could make it bigger. What I would say is, if you're going to do that, you really do have to try to, this again, just a personal opinion, not everyone will agree with it. You've got to stop financially giving money to the same clubs year in, year out. You have to have some solidarity within the league if you do actually want competition, and that is the goal. So, if Celtic are going to be winning the title more often than not, and Rangers are going to be second more often than not, and maybe once every so often Rangers will win the title, as has happened recently, you've got to try to cut back the whole sort of, we'll just keep giving them money. And what do you think is going to change if you keep giving the already rich more money? Trickle-down economics, I'm not a great fan of that in everyday, without getting into politics, I'm not a great fan of trickle-down economics in everyday life. I don't think it works for the average person. And by the same token, in my opinion, it doesn't work in football either, if you want teams who are at the lower end to be able to pick themselves up.
It's the same argument as well for the Champions League, isn't it? That if Celtic and Rangers would be the ones to make that argument, because they're the most likely to be gaining access or trying to gain access to the Champions League, then there needs to be an understanding that is the same situation that happens in Scottish football. And the other thing that I know that broadcasters love, the old firm, Celtic, Rangers, whatever you want to call it, and they want as much of that as they can possibly get. I think that 4 league games is almost too much in a season, given that particularly at the moment they're tending to meet in both cups, because there's not much else that can beat them. You will get a one-off every now and again, like Kilmarnock this season, but they're tending to knock each other out. So you're getting 6 games a season. We have a fantastic fixture that should be shown all around the world, but maybe to do it 6 times a season might dilute it a little bit. So I would be softly in favour of a bigger league. I think it would. I think fans would be more engaged that you get one trip to a ground that season rather than going up twice. I don't know. I just think that would. I think also that the teams in the Championship are not significantly weaker than those at the bottom of the Premiership. I mean, we saw that with Partick Thistle at the end of last season against Ross County. They were really unlucky, but there's a collection of teams at that level which I don't think they would weaken the league at all.
I'm going to pull this back, Andrew, in a very dark, heavy turn there. When I was enjoying the chat of the Euros there.
Sorry, Laura.
And more so just to kind of round it up as well, but I just kind of want to look ahead and allow me to dream, because I can't tell myself yet we're quite over the line until it's officially done. Yeah, until it's officially over the line. I'm not going to say those words, but yeah, if we do get to Germany, I feel like Derek would be wasting an opportunity to ask the perfect person for what can we expect here? Because as a fan, I see this as the perfect tournament. It is in one country. It is one that is the perfect size in terms of transport, moving around. They've nailed football culture in general already as it is. What can we really expect if we go to Germany, and where should the fans be looking to go? Because obviously right now we don't know yet where the games are going to be. And can I sleep on your couch? Because I think hotels might be hard to come by.
There's a queue.
Yeah, you're not the first to have made that request.
How many couches do you own?
I'm rapidly trying to obtain 5 or 6 couches. But no, Laura, it's a great question. And what I would say is that it is the perfect country. It's the ideal country for Scotland. I mean, if you think about the last Euro, it wasn't a real situation because of where we were in the pandemic at that time. And, I don't think UEFA will ever do that again with multi-city tournaments like that. You're in a country that is a real football country. What's interesting is that there's sort of a crisis of confidence with the German national team at the moment. New coach in Julian Nagelsmann, perhaps things will improve. But most of my German friends talk about how much they're looking forward to fans from other countries coming in. And I've told them, and I don't know what everybody thinks, I have a feeling that we may have, not all at once, I wouldn't be surprised if we have between 75,000 and 100,000 Scots in Germany should Scotland qualify. Over the course of the tournament. And again, in answer to your question, I say that because it's so easy to get there, relatively speaking. You don't actually even have to go to Germany to base yourself. You could decide to do it in Belgium or the Netherlands or Poland or Austria or Switzerland and make, journeys in there. But Germany is a great place, especially in the summer. There's a nighttime culture there that's wonderful. It's an outdoors culture, very much in the evenings. And, it's all about beer, but as part of a sort of a civil way of looking at life, not beer just to consume it and consume it and consume it. Sometimes in Scotland,
that was the first point you brought up. I love that, Derek.
But what's great is that every region has its own, is very proud of its own beer brewing customs, and that's part of life. Like wine is in France, beer very much in most parts of Germany, some wine regions in Germany as well. But city centres that are just a joy to be in. And one of the great things about this tournament also is that it's going to be a train experience in terms of getting around. And Deutsche Bahn is criticised within Germany for not quite having the meticulous reputation that people who are not from Germany think it has. It's not always on time. There are sometimes delays and cancellations. It's not. I would say it's not as bad as ScotRail. Having been on ScotRail quite recently, it's not as bad as ScotRail. But it is. It's not always perfect, but it will get you around. And also with all the regional trains and trams and buses, and so what I'm really saying is it's very easy. For example, if you were to base yourself in Frankfurt, right in the middle of the country, you have easy access to about 5-6 venues. An hour or two by train. And that's what I've said to most Scottish fans who have asked, where should we base ourselves? I've said, just choose a base and then go on the train, And if you do choose, places like my hub away from home is Cologne. And again, that is, Frankfurt's an hour by train. Dortmund's an hour by train. Gelsenkirchen's an hour by train. Düsseldorf's half an hour by train. You can't go wrong in a place like Köln. But also look at some of the non-venue cities. Bochum is a great city for a party and with its culture. And, that's just right there in the Ruhrpott, the industrial region beside Dortmund and Gelsenkirchen. And again, we don't know where Scotland will be playing. Some teams will be playing up in the north in Hamburg or in the east in Leipzig or Berlin. Some will be in the south in Munich or Stuttgart. But the great thing about the country is you can pop on a train in the morning and you can be in the city you need to be, in most cases, by the afternoon. If you were to go Munich, Hamburg, that takes a lot longer. That takes 7 hours or so. But it's easy to get around. And so I wouldn't sweat that too much. I would just pick a place where you want to be, assuming if Scotland make it, Laura, which I think we think is going to happen. Just choose a place, and as I say, somewhere like Mainz, somewhere like Bochum, which are not venue cities, have a look at them as well, and you're in for a treat.
I went out to Germany in the 2006 World Cup, which, I mean, it feels ridiculous to say that. It's almost 20 years ago. We went out in my beaten up old Fiesta that had about 120,000 miles on the clock. 3 of us in the car.
Oh my goodness.
That's amazing.
We toured around for like 3 weeks. We left it in Munich and went to Prague for a couple of days. Came back and it had been lifted and put in some like pounds. I mean, it was just ridiculous. Then driving up, because we got an email that had ended up in my junk folder in my Hotmail account or something. Only spotted it by chance while we were in Prague. Noticed that we'd actually got an email from FIFA saying, yeah, you were successful in the ballot for the tickets to Germany, Argentina. So we were in Prague.
My goodness.
The cars in a park out by the airport that we didn't know it was there in Munich, and the games in Berlin, and we had about 24 hours pretty much to do it, and we just made it, no sleep.
Wow.
But to back up everything that Derek has said, Germany is by an absolute mile the country in the world that is best set up to host a major tournament. And that's, I said that in 2006. Obviously, times have moved on, but having been there with Scotland and Dortmund, when you also got included in your match ticket, I think it was about €20 to watch Germany, who had just become world champions. You got your train fare included in your match ticket, and when you got into the ground, you got a beer and a Frankfurter. It was all included. Like, they treat their supporters so well, and then having done it with work, it's been fantastic. I was just in Frankfurt 2 weeks ago with Aberdeen. That's an atmosphere like I've never heard before. Mm-hmm. All the grounds are state of the art. The cities are great, and the beer culture is second to none.
It's a good point Rory makes about the public transport, and this again is sort of proof positive that German culture doesn't just happen football-wise by accident. The majority of the clubs are fan-run in the sense that there's this 50+1 rule, which means that an oligarch can't come in and treat the club like his personal toy. So you have safeguards in place, and the fans are part of that as decision makers. It's often said in Germany, we are fans, we are decision makers, we are not customers. We are not, as in England, we are not customers at all here. We are part of the decision making process. And that's why you have things like joined up public transport. It helps as well in Germany that you don't have 10 private companies running train services and bus services. It's all run by the local government or the regional government. So that allows them to do things like, as Rory said, you get your match ticket, and part of that is within the local area. 5 hours before the game, 5 hours after the game, you get transport to and from, which just makes sense. The whole thing just makes sense. And okay, UEFA are setting the prices here, so it won't be the bargain prices that you have for a Bundesliga game. There'll be some things that are different. It's a shame that the standing areas won't be part of it, because that's an intrinsic part of German culture. Rory was in Frankfurt, he saw that for himself, just what that is in Frankfurt in terms of the standing. So it'll be sitting. But still, it'll be something special. And I don't know if you guys agree. I just have this picture in my mind. I was talking to some friends in Köln recently, and just saying, I'm just visualizing 75,000 Scots here on match day, and they all say, yeah, what a beautiful thing. Let's all Let's all buy kilts and join in with them. Wouldn't that be great?
I'm gonna do what Rory does and find some hills and try and visualize the most like Scotland winning the Euros or something like that.
I'm
like
so
the
buzzing.
football Jedi way.
I'm so buzzing with this now. The only thing that's missing is the iconic Rory commentary from that John McGinn 96th minute winner against Spain. That means I can actually book my flights and get officially excited. Once I've got that, it's perfect.
Something will hopefully come to me. You don't. We'll see. I'll be in Seville for that game with Fireplay, so that's gonna be really exciting. Really looking forward to that.